Yeah.
There's one part in that where the brother tells him, he says, once you muscle past the gag reflux, a whole new world of opportunities. That's kind of how,
that one.
that's kind of how I felt about that. You just have to get past it.
When I did it was when I was a kid.
That's why I went
told me,
to Diet Dr. Pepper.
Oh, that's good stuff.
I don't think about my ex. I just say no. I read them all.
All right. We are somewhere in the Old Testament,
Somewhere. Ezekiel.
and it's somewhere in the Old Testament.
Right behind David.
No, cannot behind. It might be in front of Daniel, but it's not behind Daniel.
Oh, well, I mean, my Bible is kind of like. I have.
You have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, then Ezekiel, then Daniel, Hosea, Joel.
Yes. 19. Yeah, we did through 18.
Walked off the left. I got my notebook. I said at the door, I had to go into the house and I had my notebook.
All right. We're looking at this chart for a minute.
Same chart?
Yep. Yes.
Yesterday I was in the last class.
Smarty.
See Brother Dixon's face.
It's called Smarty Pants.
Now, if you'll look, let's see. Yes, you'll see Jeremiah, Lamentations, and that's, of course, I do by the books there, Ezekiel and Daniel. And then you ought to see lines going over to the last kings of Judah. Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. That's the kings that we're dealing with when he mentions the princes or those people who are in authority. It's along those lines right there, okay? And Zedekiah is going to be the last really king. Now, there'll be some puppet kings and that type of thing that Nebuchadnezzar sets up and those type of things. We're not counting those. But Zedekiah is going to be the last king, okay? That chart was to me very interesting, and that took me a while to do that chart. It may not be interesting to you, but it was interesting to me because I wanted to get.
These are the last kings just of Judah?
Yes, yes. Because Israel's already gone away into captivity, 722 BC. See, if you look at the chart over there, at the bottom of it, 722, Israel goes into captivity. That's Assyrian captivity.
This is a good chart. It looks like a labor of love putting this thing together.
Yeah. Then, if when we talk about the Assyrians in our geography class, okay, that's where they go in. The northern tribes go into Assyrian captivity. And usually we talk about they're never really heard from again, but they are. Some of them moved down to Judah, and I need to say that in my geography class too when we get to that point. But they moved down to Judah because we find that there's remnants of each tribe in the New Testament. Of course, when Jesus is born, there's Anna that's there, and she's from one of those tribes. So really, if I try to get those two kings in the time frame, you'd see it'd be a lot bigger than what it is. So really what I was just doing a chronology of the Old Testament. Then we get into writing prophets and those type of things. So when you get into those minor prophets, that's when it really helps you to know when they were prophesying. All right. Because we do find Zephaniah was down in Jehoahaz. All right, so we're in chapter 19 then this evening. And if those of you who are taking this class online, online, if you want a copy of the chart that I have, and again, this is my copy. This is something that I did. It's not, any mistakes on it, my mistakes. So I've tried to work on this. just let me know and I will send you a copy of it. All right.
Question first before you get going.
All right.
These 4 kings that you named
Yes.
that are listed, the last 4 on this list,
Right.
they are, when you said when Ezekiel refers to the princes,
Yes.
who he's talking about.
Right. One of these.
One of them.
It all depends on your timeline that you're talking about. Because these are going to be, you see, God tells them not to go down to Egypt. And Jeremiah is the one who has to suffer the consequences of this. He says, don't go down to Egypt because God doesn't want you to go down to Egypt. If you'll stay right here and do what you need to do, everything will be all right. You know, you won't suffer. They go down to Egypt. Okay. And so some of them, you know, that's a problem. They got to deal with God. And God's got to deal with this situation. So that's what's, you know, God says, trust in me. Now we're getting to, and when we're saying trust in God, and I hope that you get this from this class, because here is a small remnant that's going to be saved. God can do it. He took a small group of people and he brought them back down and they rebuilt Jerusalem. They did not ask for outside help as far as the people that were there. And they said no. Yes, that's Ezra and Nehemiah. So when they do that, then they're basically, they have help from the king, but they're building it themselves. They're not asking other people to come and help them. And here's that small remnant of people. And it's smaller than what's gone up there because the folks that went up there, some of them stay up there. You know, like Daniel. We never hear of Daniel coming back home again. Probably in Shushan, but still, they're the ruling people. Okay? Now, in chapter 19, this is Lamentations over the fall of Jerusalem, Judah, and its princes. Prince, the kings.
Say that again.
All right, this chapter is a lamentation over the fall of Judah and the kings. I'll put it that way. So I know we have a hard time telling princesses and prince today, so I'll just call it king. All right, now look in verse 1. He says lamentation. In verse 14, you'll find lamentations twice. Now notice he says there's the lamentation for the prince of Israel. The princes, you don't understand what I'm saying there, princes of Israel. So we're talking about the kings then. Okay. And then in verse 2, what is thy mother? A lioness. And she lay down among the lions and nourished her whelps among the young lions. So the young lions then are the people. And if we'll look at some of these kings that were ruling, like Jehoahaz, he did not rule long. He like 3 months or so, something like that, in Jerusalem. And it just wasn't much. And so then we notice in verses 5 through verse 9, here is then, because it really says this too, that they went into captivity. The kings, verse 9, it says, and they put him in ward in chains and brought him to the king of Babylon, and they brought him to the holds, and his voice should no more be heard out of the mountains of Israel. So here is then those nations then. Babylon. And then in verses 10 through 14, we find another parable of the vines. The The mother is like a vine in thy blood, planted by the waters. And she will be, she was fruitful and full of branches by reason of many waters. She was strong rod, the scepters of them that bear rule. And her statue was exalted among the thick branches. And she appeared in her height and with a multitude in her branches. And she was plucked up in her fury. She was cast down to the ground. The east wind dried up her fruit, and the strong rods were broken and withered, and fire consumed them. And now she is planted in the wilderness, in a dry and thirsty ground, and the fire is gone out of the rod of her branches, which hath devoured her fruit, so that she hath no strong rod to be a scepter to rule. This is Lamentations, and shall be for a lamentation. So here are those folks then that are the kings going in, and not only into captivity, but then that is also the process of Judah and what happened to her. She was strong. David, Solomon, and then because of sin, then she was cut down. As we read, Solomon then, because of his sins. All right. Verse number 20, or chapter number 20, excuse me. In this chapter, we could talk about the past, verses 1 through 28. We talk about the present, verses 29 through 32. And then the future, 33 through 49. Do I need to give you that again?
Yes.
All right, the past is 1 through 28. And then the present is 29 through 32. And then the future is 33 through 49. And we're talking about the fall of Jerusalem. Now, in verse 1 of chapter 20, he gives us a time frame. And it came to pass in the 7th year, in the 5th month, the 10th day of the month, that certain of the elders of Israel came to inquire of the Lord and sat before me. Okay, so he is then by the river Kibar. He's in Babylon up in there. So here's men then from Jerusalem that come up to him and inquire of the Lord. So, and then we have the word of the Lord came unto me, saying. And he's going to talk about the past with them. Okay, verse 5, just to show you. In the day when I chose Israel, and lifted up my hand unto the seed of the house of Jacob, made myself known unto him in the land of Egypt, when I lifted up my hand unto them, saying, I am the Lord your God. So he goes all the way back to when they're in captivity in the land of Egypt. Book of Exodus. Okay. And then he talks about in the wilderness, when they were in the wilderness. Look at verse 16. Because they despised my judgments and walked not in my statutes, but polluted my Sabbath. For their heart went after their idols, and they did not learn. Okay? This is why they're going into captivity, is because they were polluting the Sabbath day. And Jeremiah says you're going to keep it 70 years. Then you're going to come back. All right, verse 24. Because they had not executed my judgments, but had despised my statutes, and had polluted my Sabbaths, and their eyes, and after their fathers' idols. Therefore I will give them also statutes and not good, and judgments whereby they should not live. Now, the statutes that were not good, they were not good because they didn't follow them. They were only good if they would walk in them, and they were no longer walking in them. And then in verse 26, I polluted them in their own gifts, and I caused them to pass through the fire, all that openeth the womb, that I shall make them desolate, to the end that they might know that I am the Lord. So, that's kind of like what he says in the New Testament, that he would send them a strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Mm-hmm. So God kind of, like in Romans chapter 1, that 3 times that he says God gave them up. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what he's doing here. He's just giving up, because they are so steeped. We've talked to people before, and they're so steeped in their religious error that they will not come out of it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you realize that, there's no need to talk to those people anymore. I mean, there may be a time that you can talk to them, but now's not the time to talk to them. Yes, that's right. All right. Now, we're still talking about, well, let's go to the future then, or the present, verses 29 there. And I'm going to talk about some of this. Then I said unto them, what is the high place whereunto I go? And the name thereof is called Bema unto this day. And wherefore I say unto the house of Israel, saith the Lord God, ye are polluted after the manner of your fathers, and commit ye whoredom after the abominations. And when ye offer your gifts, when you make your sons pass through the fire, and that's offering their sons then as sacrifices. And he talked about that earlier. You pollute yourselves and your idols even to this day, and I shall inquire of you, a house of Israel. As I live, saith the Lord, I will not be inquired of by you. Okay? You can't make a requirement of me, but I'm going to require. All right. Now, I want to talk about these idols for a minute. Even verse 32. Let me read verse 32. And that which cometh into your mind shall not be at all. And ye say, we will be as the heathen and as the families of the countries, to serve wood and stone. Now let's open our Bible to Isaiah 44. Verse 8, I want to begin. Isaiah 44.
So they just told God, point blank, we ain't serving you.
Pretty much. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 16. In 1 Kings chapter 19, I believe it is, they didn't answer. If the Lord be God, serve him. If Baal be God, then serve him. People answered him not a word. In Jeremiah 6 and verse 16, he says, seek the old paths, wherein is the good way. And let me get over there. Jeremiah 6 and verse 16. And thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways, and seek and ask for the old paths, and wherein is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. So this is nothing new. Okay, now back to Isaiah 44, beginning with verse number 8. Now this always tickles me. Now this is what they're doing. And God's making really mockery of them to show them how foolish they are. Fear ye not, neither be afraid, for I told thee from the time, and have declared it. Ye are even my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Yea, there is no God. I know not any. They that make a graven image are all of them. Vanity and their delectable things shall not profit. And they are their own witness, and they see not, nor know, that they may be ashamed. For who hath formed a god, or molten a graven image that is profitable for nothing? Now think about something. When they in the book of Exodus, when they get that golden calf, what does Aaron tell them to do? Break off the earrings, okay? And you'd be surprised. Every one of them breaks off an earring. We're talking about thousands of pounds of gold. 18,000. And it's more like 88,000. Okay.
But then they burn it back down. Moses did make them drink it.
All right. Now, when Moses approaches Aaron. What does Aaron say?
They just threw it in and it popped out.
And it jumped out. Out jumped this calf. Lo and behold. But you've got to go back and read carefully. They took gravening tools. And that's right. So this thing was not just jumped out this calf. It was, more than that. Okay.
And then something just got hot instantly.
Yeah.
And then he passed the buck on the people, blaming the people as well.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted to
Yeah.
do. They made it.
But that's not the sin, and that's what's amazing. That's not the sin that kept Aaron out of the land of Canaan. All right. It's something else.
Like Flip Wilson, the devil made it.
All right. Now,
I love Flip Wilson.
all right, in verse 11, behold, all his fellows shall be ashamed, and the workmen, they are of men. Let them be gathered together, let them stand up, yet they shall fear, and they shall be ashamed together. The smith with the tongs both worketh in the coals, and fashion it with hammers, and worketh it with the strength of his arms. Yea, he is hungry, and his strength faileth. He drinketh no water, and is faint. The carpenter stretcheth out his rule. He marketh it with a line. He fitteth it with planes, and he marketh it out with a compass, and maketh it after the image of a man according to the beauty of man, that it may remain in the house. And he heweth down cedars, and maketh the cypress and the oaks, which can be strengthened for himself among the trees of the forest. He planteth the ash, and the rain doth nourisheth it. Then shall it be for a man to burn. He shall take thereof and warm himself. Yea, and he kindleth it and breaketh bread. He maketh a god and worshipeth it. He maketh it a graven image and falleth down thereto. Now, watch what he's doing then. What's he doing in this verse 15? He's warming himself. He's kindled it. He's baking bread. And then he's making a god. Fourth thing that he does after this tree is cut down is make a god. Now watch verse 16. He burneth part of it with fire, and with part he eateth flesh, and he roasteth roast, and is satisfied. And he has warmed himself, and saith, I am warm, I have seen the fire. And the residue thereof he maketh a god, even the graven image. He falleth down to it, and worshipeth it, and prayeth unto it, and saith, Deliver me, thou art my God. Now in my shop I have some residue. I have leftover wood. And what they're doing then, that's what I have left over after I make a project. And what they're doing then is putting this wood together, and they're, here's my God. Okay. Deliver me, thou art my God. They have not known or understood, for he hath shut their eyes, and they cannot see, and their hearts they cannot understand. And none considereth in his heart, neither is there knowledge nor understanding to say, I have burned part of it in the fire. Yea, also I have baked bread upon the coals thereof. I have roasted flesh and eaten it, and shall I make the residue thereof an abomination. Shall I fall down to the stalks of the tree? He feedeth on the ashes, he deceiveth his heart, and turneth him aside, that he cannot deliver his soul, nor say, Is there not a lie in my right hand? Remember these, O Jacob, and Israel, for thou art my servant, I have formed thee. Thou art my servant, O Israel, thou shalt not be forgotten of me. I have blotted out as a thick cloud thy transgressions, and as a cloud thy sins. Return unto me, for I have redeemed thee. I think that's as far as I wanted to go with 21, but that's okay. All right. So that's how foolish they were and how foolish they had become. And so there is Isaiah, and Isaiah is 150 years before what we're dealing with right here. And they want it so. This is what they want. Okay, so we're in chapter 20 now. Let's look then. Verse 33. As I live, saith the Lord, surely with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm and with a fury poured out, I will rule over you. Okay? All right, so God's going to be their ruler if they will allow it. Okay, now verses 35 through 38. Let's see. And I will bring you to the wilderness of the people, and there will I plead with you face to face, like as I pleaded with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Egypt. So will I plead with you, saith the Lord, and I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. And I will purge out among you the rebels and them that transgress against me, and I will bring them forth out of the country where they sojourn, and they shall not enter into the land of Israel, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. Okay, so there is then some of them are coming back. There's going to be that remnant then that comes back to Israel. Then verse 39 is irony. As for you, O house of Israel, saith the Lord God, go ye and serve ye every one his idols, and hereafter also, if ye will not hearken unto me, but pollute ye my holy name, no more with your gifts and your idols, with your idols. Keep on sinning, he's saying. He's also dealing with this in this section 32 through 39. Here's the chastisements that he's going to cause to come upon them. Now, verses 40 through 44, here is the consequences of them coming back. For in my holy mountain, the height of Israel, saith the Lord, there shall be all the house of Israel, all of them in the land serve me. There will I accept them, and I will inquire of your offerings and your first fruits of your oblations and when your holy things. So here's what God's requiring of them. Going back and requiring them. And then he says that type of thing earlier too. All right, in verse 40, there's God will accept them as his own. And it's going to be through the remnant. God's name will be satisfied. And they will be restored through the power of God. All right, now if we continue on in verse 42, there's going to be some more that God's going to give them. And ye shall know that I am the Lord, where I will bring you into the land of Israel. So he's bringing them back to the land. He would keep his words. And then it's also into a country for which I have lifted my hand and give it to your fathers. And there shall ye remember your ways and all your doings. All right, so here's the remembering their past failings. All right, in verse 46 now, the Son of Man, set thy face towards the south and drop the word towards the south and prophesy against the forest of the south field. So he's talking about the south there because where he's located, he's talking about Judah. When he says drop thy word, he's talking about preaching and prophesying. Then notice in verse 47, he talks about a green tree and a dry tree. The green tree are the righteous, and the dry tree are the wicked. And then in verse 49, then said I, oh, Lord God, they say to me, doth he not speak parables? Why did Jesus use parables?
So that those who see would not see, and those that hear would not hear.
All right.
Because they wouldn't understand any of it.
That's right. So he took simple things and he illustrated great Bible illustrations with those great spiritual meanings. All right. Chapter 21 then. Here is all right. I got to find what I'm talking about. All right, here is the drawing of the sword. The drawn sword. All right, verse 1 and 2. Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face towards Jerusalem, and drop thy word towards the holy place, and prophesy against the land of Israel. So he's talking then to the temple and the areas round about that. Now watch verse 4. Seeing then that I will cut off from thee the righteous, the wicked thereof, shall my sword go forth out of a sheath against all the flesh, and from the south to the north. So here's then all involved, all flesh. All the parts between Babylon and Jerusalem, everybody. Verse 7, and it shall be that when they say unto thee, what sight thou? And thou shalt answer, for tidings, because it cometh, and every heart shall melt, and all hands shall be feeble, and every spirit shall faint, and all knees shall be weak as water. Behold, it cometh, and shall be brought to pass, saith the Lord. All right. Every heart shall melt, the hands will be feeble, every spirit faint, and the knees shall be weak as water. Oh, there's what I'm talking about. Now, notice in verse 9, this is what I want to get to, because this is talking about the sword then. He's already talked about how he's going to do that. But notice the verse 9. Son of man, prophesy and say, thus saith the Lord. Say a sword is sharpened and also furbished. Okay? Now, what do we mean by furbished?
All shined up and
That's right.
clean and
That's right.
all that.
Really, it's more shined up. It's the brightness of the sword. And that's part of the, see, when they flash that sword and it catches the light, that's a terrible thing in the sight then of your enemy. When you've got that sword up there and you've got it, and it catches that light just right and it blinds them. So that's what he's doing with the sword when he says to fabrish it. Okay. It is sharp to make sore slaughter. It is furbished that it may glitter. Should ye then make mirth? It contemneth the rod of my son as every tree. And he that hath been given to furbish, that it should be handled, this sword shall be sharpened. And it is furbished to give it into the hand of the slayer. Cry and howl, Son of man, for it shall be upon the people. It shall be upon all the princes of Israel. Terror by reason of the sword shall be upon my people. Smite therefore upon the thigh. So here is then the people and the prince. Everybody's involved. Now drop down to verse 14. Thou therefore, son of man, prophesy and smite thy hands together. Let the sword be doubled, and third time the sword of the slain, It is the sword of the great men that are slain, which entereth into the privy chambers. So just think about that. Clap their hands. Okay? And then there's going to be doubled. And third time, here's the intensity of force. So he's trying to get their attention. Look at verse 17. I also smite my hands together, and I will cause my fury to rest. I, the Lord, have said it. Through with them. Okay. Here's what's going to happen. Now look at verse 18. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying. So we find in verses 1, 8, and 18, the word of the Lord came unto me. All right, and then the sword of the king of Babylon may come. Both twain shall come forth out of one land, and choose thou a place, choose it at the head of the way of the city. So he's telling them it's going to come from Babylon. It's already come from Babylon, but it's going to continue. There's three carrying aways that we need to notice. All right, the first one's already taken place. Second one, if not has taken place, is getting real close to, and here's going to be the third time that they're going to be carried away. All right. Now notice verse 20, appoint my way that the sword may come to Rabbah and the Ammonites and to Judah in Jerusalem the defense. So here are the people that are going to suffer from the sword. And it's really the Ammonites and Jerusalem. Verse 21, the king of Babylon stood his arrows bright, he consulted with images, and he looked into the liver. This is all divination. You know what I mean by divination, don't you?
You know, like Christian prayer.
Yes, that's right. You remember what Saul had done to the witches? Okay. In 1 Samuel chapter 6, the ark was taken. Okay, and it was sent back. And they used divination to find out which way it would go back. And they said, if it's this way, then in one way or one. And God used that, all right, to show that God was in the control. So sometimes that is used. I kind of think it's like when in the Acts chapter 1, when they were getting the Matthias to take the place of Judas, they cast lots. And so I think that is the same type of thing to find out the purpose of God.
Urim and Thummim.
Yes. At one time they would use the Urim and the Thummim, but it was no longer, God was, I think when we talked about Ezekiel chapter 10, when God went up from there, that he no longer, kind of like when Saul did not have a vision from anybody, so he went to this witch of Endor, and then God allowed that witch to call up Samuel. And so God does use that sometimes, and let us use our own foolishness to get his way and to get his point across in this. All right. Look at verse 27. I will overturn it. Now, anytime you see that type of thing, what do you think is happening? That's right. Here is destruction. All right. And it should be no more until it come to pass whose right it is, and I will give it to him. That's talking about Christ. Okay. The scepter shall not part out of Judah. And so then here's Christ on his throne, to whom it belonged. Genesis chapter 49 and verse 10. Other passages. I think this is talking about Acts chapter 15 and 17. Verse 28. And thou, son of man, prophesy and say, thus saith the Lord God concerning in the Ammonites, and concerning the reproaches. Even say thou, the sword is drawn for the slaughter, it is furbished to consume because of the glittering. Now, understand something. Here's the Ammonites, and he is prophesying against the Ammonites. So here are then non-Jewish people that he's holding accountable, but he's prophesying to them and telling them these things. We need to remember that. Now the Ammonites took up a reproach and exalted themselves against Judah. And you don't do that. God is not pleased with that.
You said the Ammonites exalted themselves
Uh-huh.
and came up against Judah.
Uh-huh. And then in verse 29, he's talking about false diviners. Whilst they see vanity into thee, whilst they divine a lie unto thee, to bring thee into the necks of them that are slain, the wicked whose hand is come, when their iniquity shall have an end. In verse 31, he's talking about the Chaldeans. All right, chapter 22. All right, here's the sins of Jerusalem. These are sins that are disgrace, even the heathen in Canaan. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 5. Remember what Paul said about the sin that they were committing there?
Not even the Gentiles do
Yes.
it.
It's a shame. He said, you ought to be, let's see, it is reported commonly that there is fornication among you, and such fornication is not so much as named among the Gentiles that one should have his father's wife. Now watch what he says. Ye are puffed up. Now he uses that again in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, that your knowledge puffed them up. And they were, well, look at what we got. He said, no. Okay. Not even named among the Gentiles. You know, this is pretty bad. You people, you're supposed to be Christians and you're living like a bunch of heathens. And they wouldn't even do this. All right, so that's what we're talking about in this chapter. Verses 1 through 16, Jerusalem is a bloody city. There's idolatry that's involved. Now, idolatry, you think that Judaism was a bloody, so this is talking about as a bloody religion. Now, you're talking about something else then. Okay, when he's talking about a bloody religion, what did they do with their children? That's right. And God's not going to let that go by. Okay, so here is then this bloody city, and it's accelerating the time for God's wrath. Now, that's not the only bloody city, okay? In Nahum 3:1, we find that Nineveh is a bloody city. All right, verse 22:3, it says, and then said thou, thus saith the Lord God, the city sheddeth blood in the midst of it, that her time may come and maketh idols against herself to defile herself. So this is then causing the children to pass through, or the sons to pass through, then the fire. Okay. So idolatry and murder, it's all going on through here. God said not to do either one of them. In verse 4 then, here is it draw near, cause the days to draw near. Okay, so here's the judgment of Babylon coming down upon these people because of the wrongs that they had committed. Let's go to verse 7. In thee have they set light by the father and mother. In the midst of thee have they dwelt oppression with a stranger. And in thee have they vexed the fatherless and the widows. And notice the things that they had done. They had set light by the fathers and the mothers. They had no reverence for them. Number 2, they had wronged the fatherless and the widows. Yes. Number 3, they had then despised also the sojourner. In verse 8, we're going to find they despised holy things and profaned the Sabbath. Now, when they did not take care of the widows and the orphans, God really started holding them accountable. And you watch how Israel, now he always held Israel accountable. You remember when they were to glean the fields, they were not to do the corners. I think we talked about that last week, or one time we did talk about that. All right, that was for the widows and the orphans. Now, when we come to the book of Ruth, where did Ruth work? All right, now what did Boaz tell his men to do?
Not only not glean all of it, but we'll drop some of it.
Okay, because once you dropped it, you couldn't pick it up.
Because of how she treated your mother-in-law.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he said, drop handfuls on purpose.
She was a widow, both of them.
Right. And so he was, and that's why God was, I think, taking care of them and watching out for them because that's right. And Boaz saw that she's a righteous woman because she's taking care not only of herself, but also her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law, they were from two separate nations.
Ruth was a Moabite.
That's right. And that's what's interesting when you look at Ruth chapter 1 and what is it, verses 14 through 16 there, where we say, entreat me not to leave thee, nor forsake thee, nor following after thee. That's talking to a mother-in-law. That's not talking about husband and wife. That's talking about a mother-in-law.
But because she was so good, she was blessed by being in the lineage.
How do you feel about your mother-in-law?
Okay. My mother-in-law.
Yeah, your mother-in-law wouldn't know it.
No, but she loved me more than she loved you.
That's true. That's true. She treats you better than she does me. All right. So, when you think about these things that's going on and how God expects us to take care of those people. Now, why the sojourner? Why were they to be careful with the sojourner?
Because they were sojourners in foreign lands.
That's right. And what about us today? Strangers and pilgrims looking for a city. That's right. Okay. So we need to take care of, and I think we're losing this respect for our fathers and our mothers. We're losing the respect for the widows and the fatherless and that type of thing, and those that are strangers. And we're despising holy things. I think this is happening today.
I think we have no reverence sometimes.
Yeah.
Even in worship, we just treat it like a circus.
All right. So that profane the Sabbath, that's a real problem to them too, for them.
That's been their problem throughout.
Yeah. Look at verse 16.
I have a question. Before you, if you
Okay, go ahead.
Verse 10. And you men uncover their father's nakedness. When we had our class on Genesis,
Yes.
where, Canaan's father uncovered his father's nakedness.
Yep.
That, you made a mention about that. That seems to be much more than just seeing them naked, right?
Right.
I mean, there's something very deviant about that.
That's right. You go back and
More lustful.
and I think it's Colin DeLitch, that commentary said on that. And there may have been some sexual perversion there with his father. Now I'm saying that's what some of these commentaries say.
Would that have reference in where the law's given? It talks about how you're not to lay with your father's wife or your family, thereby uncovering
That's
his
nakedness.
Would that reference?
I think that's all involved in this.
Just like the sin of Tamar and Judah. You know, even though she was a daughter-in-law and she was a widow,
Excuse me.
she wasn't married, but she was still considered his child.
And see, the laws of incest were not set at that time.
Mhm.
The laws of incest were not set until after Exodus chapter 20.
But somehow
But
they
they
told
knew that then that it was incest. Okay. So, but when you look at that also, who did Abraham marry?
Half-sister.
All right, and who did
Excuse me.
Isaac marry?
his
And
first cousin,
Jacob married.
his first cousin.
Okay.
Two of them.
So, you know, you have those things going on at that time.
Yeah, but there's a difference between a voluntary marital situation and arranged marriage with parents involved and all that, and then that the sin of like you
Deviant.
said, a deviant and deception that was going on with Tamar and
Yeah.
Judah.
Yep, think so.
It's the whole context of it.
All right. I have time for us to cease here. And you all have class, some of you have classes next hour, don't you?
You have the
No, I have Colossians and